Back in 1981, audiences were treated to a wild, surreal adventure that was part fantasy, part satire, and completely Terry Gilliam. Time Bandits wasn't just another children's movie. It was a bizarre, time-hopping romp filled with historical hijinks, irreverent humor, and a dash of darkness. The film follows Kevin, an imaginative young boy, who joins a band of dwarves with a stolen map of time portals. Along the way, they crash through different eras, meet figures like Napoleon and Robin Hood, and battle the forces of evil himself. But beyond the quirky premise, the film became something much bigger. It's often considered the first entry in Gilliam's so-called trilogy of imagination, later joined by Brazil, 1985, and The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, 1988. While Time Bandits may look like a chaotic children's fantasy on the surface, it's actually layered with biting commentary about consumerism, power, and the absurdity of history. The film's blend of comedy, darkness, and pure invention made it stand out in the early 80s. With appearances from Sean Connery, John Cleese, and Ian Holm, it had the kind of star power you wouldn't normally expect in such an eccentric project. Over the years, Time Bandits has grown into a cult classic, beloved by fans who appreciate its oddball charm and Gilliam's unmistakable vision. 1. The trilogy of imagination begins. Time Bandits wasn't meant to stand alone. Terry Gilliam conceived it as the first part of a thematic trilogy exploring imagination at different stages of life: childhood, Time Bandits; adulthood, Brazil; and old age, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. Each film dives into how imagination clashes with reality, authority, and society's absurd rules. Gilliam once said he thought of Time Bandits as a child's view of the world, full of wonder, chaos, and unfiltered logic. That framing explains why the movie feels both whimsical and unsettling at the same time. 2. The dwarves were written for Monty Python friends. Gilliam, a Monty Python alum, initially wrote the 6 dwarves as parts for his fellow Python cast. He imagined them all as mischievous versions of the same character, little authority-defying rebels. But scheduling conflicts and budget issues made that impossible, so Gilliam cast actors like Kenny Baker, who played R2-D2 in Star Wars, and David Rappaport. Ironically, this turned out to be a blessing, as the cast of Little People gave the group a distinct personality that wouldn't have been possible with 6 pythons in disguise. 3. Sean Connery was a last-minute addition. The role of King Agamemnon was originally written as someone like Sean Connery. To Gilliam's surprise, Connery himself ended up taking the part, thanks in part to producer Dennis O'Brien. Connery reportedly loved the script's strangeness and even improvised some of his scenes. His star power gave the film a huge credibility boost, especially since much of the cast was quirky and unknown. Connery's appearance also played into the film's surreal tone. Here was James Bond himself, casually mentoring a young boy in a mythological Greek setting. 4. The Napoleon obsession came from real history. Ian Holm's hilarious portrayal of Napoleon as a short man obsessed with height wasn't just a cheap gag. It came from Gilliam and Michael Palin's fascination with historical rumors. While the Napoleon was short myth has since been debunked, they leaned into it for comedic effect. In the film, Napoleon brags about his love for little things, like tiny soldiers and dwarves. Holm played the part so straight that it turned into one of the film's funniest running jokes, perfectly balancing absurdity with sharp satire. 5. The evil genius was almost played by Jonathan Pryce. David Warner's evil genius is one of the most memorable villains of 80s fantasy. Arrogant, tech-obsessed, and hilariously petty. But he wasn't the first choice. Gilliam initially considered Jonathan Pryce for the role, who would later star in Brazil. In the end, Warner's performance gave the villain just the right balance of menace and camp. His obsession with computers, missiles, and modern technology was Gilliam's tongue-in-cheek jab at society's blind faith in progress, making evil oddly relatable despite his ridiculous ambitions. 6. John Cleese as Robin Hood was pure Python. When John Cleese shows up as Robin Hood, the scene feels like it could have come straight from a Monty Python sketch. Cleese's version of Robin is overly polite, detached, and hilariously clueless about the suffering of his people. Gilliam and co-writer Michael Palin deliberately wrote him that way to lampoon the romanticized versions of Robin Hood audiences were used to. Cleese improvised some lines, adding that dry wit only he could deliver. It's a small role, but it remains one of the film's funniest highlights. 7. Michael Palin's running joke with Shelley Duvall. Palin didn't just co-write the film, he also popped up in front of the camera. Alongside Shelley Duvall, he plays a series of recurring characters who appear in different time periods, always stuck in awkward romantic situations. Their stammering, unlucky-in-love routine became a running gag that helped tie the episodic story together. Duvall, fresh off The Shining, 1980, was thrilled to play something more lighthearted and goofy. Her scenes with Palin gave the film moments of silly human comedy amid all the surreal chaos. 8. The map was a hand-painted work of art. One of the most iconic props in the movie is the map of time portals. Instead of making it look clean or high-tech, Gilliam had it designed as an ancient, mysterious, almost mystical document. The prop was entirely hand-painted, full of intricate details and symbols. It looked like something you might find in a dusty treasure chest. Fans loved it so much that replicas of the map later became highly sought-after collectibles, with some even recreated for exhibitions celebrating Gilliam's career. 9. The Supreme Being was played for laughs. Ralph Richardson's portrayal of the Supreme Being was intentionally anticlimactic. Instead of a booming, godlike figure, he's portrayed as a calm, bureaucratic authority who casually scolds the dwarves for stealing his map. Gilliam wanted to poke fun at the idea of divine authority, portraying God as more of an administrator than an almighty ruler. Richardson reportedly loved this low-key, humorous approach and played the role with a twinkle in his eye. The result was both irreverent and oddly charming. 10. The ending shocked parents everywhere. One of the most controversial parts of Time Bandits was its dark ending. After Kevin defeats evil with the help of the Supreme Being, he returns home, only for his parents to touch a piece of smoldering, concentrated evil and explode. Kevin is left alone as fire trucks drive away. Many parents expected a happy, kid-friendly resolution and were horrified. Gilliam defended the ending as true to the film's darkly comic tone. Decades later, that final twist is still one of the most talked-about moments in the movie. 11. The film was made on a modest budget. Despite its ambitious scope, Time Bandits was shot on a relatively small budget of about $5 million. To stretch resources, Gilliam leaned heavily on practical effects, clever set designs, and matte paintings instead of expensive visual effects. The result was a film that looked far bigger than it actually cost. The scrappy, handmade feel even added to the charm, making the world of Time Bandits seem both fantastical and tactile, something that CGI-heavy films decades later often failed to capture. 12. George Harrison helped save the film. Yes, that George Harrison, from the Beatles, played a crucial role in getting Time Bandits made. Through his company, Handmade Films, Harrison helped finance the project when other studios were skeptical. He even co-wrote and performed the closing credits song, Dream Away. Harrison's laid-back style meshed perfectly with Gilliam's offbeat vision, and without his support, the film may never have reached the big screen. Fun fact, Harrison was reportedly baffled but amused by Gilliam's surreal sense of humor. 13. David Rappaport was the heart of the dwarves. As Randall, the self-appointed leader of the dwarves, David Rappaport gave the group their driving energy. His performance balanced authority with constant exasperation at his bumbling crew. Rappaport had previously been a theater actor, but Time Bandits brought him international recognition. Gilliam later admitted that casting Rappaport was one of the best decisions he made, as the actor's charisma turned what could have been a one-note character into the emotional anchor of the team. 14. The giant was a low-tech marvel. One of the most memorable sequences involves a literal giant emerging from the sea with a ship on his head. Instead of high-tech effects, Gilliam used a combination of miniatures, forced perspective, and a huge mechanical headpiece worn by an actor. It was clunky and difficult to maneuver, but the result looked surreal and dreamlike. Gilliam loved these imperfect effects because they gave the movie a sense of weird authenticity, as if you were watching a child's imagination come to life on screen. 15. It became a surprise box office hit. Nobody expected Time Bandits to succeed commercially. It was too weird, too British, and too dark for what looked like a kid's film. But audiences loved its originality. Released in the U.S. in November 1981, the movie went on to gross over $40 million worldwide, making it Gilliam's first big financial success as a director. The film's unexpected box office win paved the way for Gilliam's future projects, proving that audiences were willing to embrace his unique brand of storytelling. 16. Critics were divided, but kids loved it. When Time Bandits hit theaters, critics didn't quite know what to make of it. Some praised its imagination and originality, while others thought it was too chaotic and dark for children. Roger Ebert gave it a positive review, noting its sense of wonder, but his colleague Gene Siskel wasn't as enthusiastic. Interestingly, the movie resonated most with younger audiences. Kids loved the bizarre adventure, even if parents sometimes found it unsettling. Over time, the film's reputation grew, cementing it as a cult favorite. 17. The film inspired future fantasy directors. Gilliam's blend of humor, darkness, and surreal imagery made a lasting impression on filmmakers who grew up watching Time Bandits. Directors like Edgar Wright and Taika Waititi have cited Gilliam as an influence, with Time Bandits often mentioned as a film that showed fantasy could be both silly and profound. Even elements of modern fantasy TV, like absurdist humor clashing with epic stakes, owe something to the groundwork Gilliam laid with this eccentric classic. 18. A TV series remake was in development. Over the years, there have been multiple attempts to reboot Time Bandits. At one point, Gilliam himself considered a sequel, but it never materialized. More recently, Apple TV Plus developed a series adaptation with Taika Waititi involved as co-creator. While the show reimagines the story for a modern audience, the spirit of Gilliam's original remains. Fans have been curious to see whether the offbeat charm of the 1981 film can translate into a serialized format. 19. Gilliam's dark ending was non-negotiable. Producers were nervous about the bleak conclusion where Kevin's parents explode, leaving him alone. They pushed Gilliam to consider a happier resolution, but he refused. For Gilliam, the ending was essential. It emphasized the absurdity and cruelty of the adult world compared to the imagination of childhood. Though shocking, it's part of what made Time Bandits stand out from other fantasy films of the era. Gilliam later admitted he enjoyed how much the ending unsettled audiences. 20. It remains a cult classic today. More than 40 years later, Time Bandits still has a devoted fan base. Screenings draw nostalgic audiences, props and replicas remain collector's items, and discussions about its strange, unsettling tone continue online. While it may never have the mainstream recognition of other 80s fantasy films like Labyrinth or The Dark Crystal, it holds a unique place in cinema history. For many fans, it was the first movie that showed how strange, unpredictable, and wildly creative film could be. Time Bandits, 1981. Might not be everyone's idea of a children's fantasy, but that's exactly what makes it so memorable. With its mix of slapstick comedy, philosophical musings, and pitch-black humor, it carved out a place as one of Terry Gilliam's most distinctive works. It pushed the boundaries of what family entertainment could look like. And for many kids growing up in the 80s, it was their first taste of truly bizarre cinema. Whether you remember the hand-painted map, Sean Connery as a Greek king, or that unforgettable ending with exploding parents, Time Bandits remains a one-of-a-kind trip through history and imagination. It may be messy, it may be strange, but it's never boring, and that's why it continues to capture the hearts of dreamers, rebels, and fans of the wonderfully weird.